It was supposed to be an ordinary morning in Hollywood. Another day of routine headlines, movie updates, and celebrity gossip scrolling across screens. But then suddenly, everything changed. News alerts began flashing at the same time on phones, televisions, and social media feeds. The kind of alerts that make people stop whatever they are doing. The kind that feel heavy even before you read the full sentence. The report said that Rob Reiner's son had tragically ended his life. At first, many people thought it was just another rumor. Hollywood is full of false stories and exaggerated claims, but within minutes, reliable sources confirmed it. The news was real. A family known for laughter, creativity, and decades of success was now at the center of a heartbreaking tragedy. The entertainment world froze. Reporters gathered outside homes and studios. Friends of the family started receiving calls from every direction. Social media filled with messages of shock and sympathy. People who had grown up watching Rob Reiner's films and television work suddenly found themselves processing a story that felt too painful to believe. Most reactions from celebrities followed the same pattern. Short statements, respectful condolences, and carefully chosen words. That is how Hollywood usually handles moments like this. Polite, controlled, and emotionally distant. But then Albert Brooks spoke, and his reaction was nothing like the others. Instead of a simple message of sadness, Brooks appeared visibly shaken. He didn't read from a prepared statement. He didn't follow the normal script. He spoke from the heart, slowly and carefully, as if choosing every word with great difficulty. "This is not just a tragedy," he said. "This is a story people don't really understand." Those lines immediately caught everyone's attention because they sounded different. They sounded personal. Albert Brooks was not just another celebrity commenting on the situation. He had known Rob Reiner for most of his life. They were not casual friends. They had shared decades of memories, projects, conversations, and private moments. When Brooks spoke, people felt like they were hearing from someone who truly knew what had been happening behind closed doors. Reporters expected him to stop after a few sentences. Instead, he continued, his voice heavy with emotion. There were things going on that no one saw, things people didn't want to see. In that moment, the entire tone of the story shifted. What had first seemed like a simple, heartbreaking news event suddenly felt deeper and more complicated. Brooks wasn't just mourning, he was hinting that there was more to understand, more to the story than the public would ever read in headlines. And just like that, a normal breaking news morning turned into something much bigger. The world began to realize that this tragedy might not be as simple as it appeared. Albert Brooks had always been known as a calm and thoughtful man. Throughout his long career in Hollywood, he had faced countless interviews, red carpets, and public moments. He knew how to speak carefully. He knew how to keep emotions under control. But this time was different. When the cameras turned toward him after the tragic news broke, people expected the usual response. A few kind words, a respectful message for the family, and then silence. That is how these situations normally go. But Brooks did not follow that familiar path. Instead, he looked tired, shaken, and deeply affected in a way no one had ever seen before. He stood in front of reporters with a heavy expression and said something that immediately made everyone pause. "I can't pretend this came out of nowhere," he admitted. Those words alone changed everything. It was not an accusation. It was not an angry statement. It was simply honest. And honesty like that is rare in Hollywood, especially during moments when most people prefer to stay quiet and safe. Brooks explained that for years, he had watched the Reiner family struggle in ways the public never noticed. He spoke carefully, making it clear that he was not trying to blame anyone. But he also refused to pretend that this tragedy was a complete surprise. "There are stories behind every family," he said softly, "and some of those stories never make it to the screen." Reporters pressed him for more details. They wanted to know what he meant. But Brooks chose his words wisely. He did not want to turn a painful situation into gossip. Still, he felt that staying silent would be worse. He described how Rob Reiner had always been a loving and devoted father. From the outside, the family seemed strong, successful, and happy. But like many families, they had private battles that no one talked about. Brooks admitted that he had seen small signs over the years. Moments of tension, moments of worry, things that at the time felt ordinary but now look different in hindsight. "When something like this happens," he said, You start replaying every memory in your head. His voice cracked slightly as he spoke, and that vulnerability made his words even more powerful. People could tell this was not a prepared performance. This was a man trying to make sense of something that felt impossible to understand. What surprised everyone the most was how direct he became. "This isn't just a sad ending," Brooks continued. "It's the result of a long, complicated journey that most people never saw." With that sentence, he opened a door. Suddenly, the story was no longer just about one tragic moment. It was about years of emotions, struggles, and unspoken pain. Brooks was not giving answers, but he was making it clear that there were deeper layers to everything that had happened. Hollywood is used to neat and simple narratives, but Albert Brooks was refusing to give one. And because of that, people began to listen more closely than ever before. To really understand why Albert Brooks reacted the way he did, you have to understand how far back his connection with Rob Reiner actually went. This wasn't just two Hollywood figures who knew each other from events or award shows. Their relationship was much deeper than that. Brooks and Reiner had grown up in the same world. They came from the same generation of entertainers, shaped by similar experiences and similar dreams. Long before Rob Reiner became a famous director, and long before Albert Brooks built his legendary comedy career, they were just two young men trying to find their place in a complicated industry. Over the years, their paths crossed again and again. They worked in the same circles, shared the same friends, and watched each other rise to success. What started as professional respect slowly turned into genuine friendship. Brooks often joked in interviews that he and Rob spoke a language only longtime friends could understand. They didn't need to explain things to each other. They had already lived through enough together to read between the lines. That history is what made his reaction so personal. When Brooks talked about Rob Reiner, he wasn't speaking about a celebrity. He was speaking about someone he had known for decades, someone he had seen in both good times and bad times. He had watched Rob celebrate victories, raise a family, and build a life filled with creativity and passion. Because of that closeness, Brooks had seen sides of Rob that the public never saw. He knew how seriously Rob took his role as a father. He knew how much pride Rob had in his children and how deeply he cared about their happiness. To Brooks, Rob Reiner was never just the confident man behind classic films. He was also a friend who carried private worries like any other parent. That is why Brooks's words carried so much weight. When he spoke about the tragedy, he wasn't guessing or speculating. He was remembering years of conversations, dinners, phone calls, and quiet moments that never made it into headlines. Brooks described how Rob often talked about family more than work. Even at the height of his career, his children were always his main focus. Success in Hollywood was important, but being a good father mattered more. That is why the loss felt so unimaginable. For Brooks, this wasn't just another sad news story. It was something that hit close to home. He had seen Rob's love and dedication firsthand. He had seen the effort Rob put into trying to keep his family together, even when things became difficult. And now, standing in front of cameras, Brooks was not just reacting as a public figure. He was reacting as a longtime friend who suddenly realized how much pain had been hiding beneath the surface all along. Understanding that friendship helps explain why Brooks could not simply give a polite, distant statement. His emotions were too real for that. This wasn't a headline to him. It was personal. From the outside, the Reiner family always looked like one of Hollywood's success stories. They had talent, respect, stability, and a legacy that stretched across generations. To fans and to the media, everything about them seemed solid and secure. But as Albert Brooks slowly began to explain, real life is rarely as perfect as it appears. He spoke about how fame often creates an illusion. People see smiling photos, red carpet moments, and successful careers, and they assume that happiness must automatically follow. But behind those bright images, every family has private struggles that the world never notices. According to Brooks, the Reiner family was no different. He described how, over the years, small signs of tension began to appear. Nothing dramatic at first, nothing that would make headlines, just little moments that only close friends might pick up on. He remembered times when conversations felt a bit heavier than before, when jokes didn't come as easily, when Rob seemed more tired than usual. At the time, those things didn't feel alarming. They just felt like normal family stress. But looking back now, Brooks said those small moments took on a new meaning. Families don't fall apart all at once, he explained. It happens slowly, in ways you don't even realize until much later. He talked about how difficult it can be to truly know what is happening inside someone else's home. Even close friends only see pieces of the full picture. Most people hide their hardest battles, especially in a place like Hollywood where image is everything. Brooks admitted that, like many others, he had assumed that any problems within the family would eventually pass. After all, Rob Reiner was known as a strong, thoughtful, and caring man. If anyone could handle difficulties, people believed it was him. That belief made it easy to overlook warning signs. Brooks said that no one ever imagined things were as fragile as they later turned out to be. The family still attended events together, still appeared united, still looked like they were holding everything together. But appearances, he reminded everyone, can be misleading. He described how public life often forces families to pretend everything is fine, even when it isn't. Problems get pushed aside, conversations get avoided, and people convince themselves that time will eventually fix whatever is broken. In the Reiner household, Brooks suggested, that is exactly what happened. There was love, there was effort, there was concern, but there was also a growing distance that no one quite knew how to bridge. And because nothing ever looked openly dramatic, it was easy for everyone to believe that things were still under control. Only after the tragedy did those quiet years begin to look different. Brooks admitted that he, like many others, now wished he had paid closer attention. But he also understood how easy it is to miss what someone is trying so hard to hide. This story didn't begin with an ending, he said softly. It began with a lot of small moments no one fully understood. And with that, he made it clear that what happened was not a sudden shock, but the final chapter of a long, unseen struggle. As Albert Brooks kept talking, he slowly began to describe the first warning signs he personally noticed over the years. These were not dramatic scenes or explosive arguments. They were small changes, the kind that are easy to ignore when you don't want to believe something is wrong. He explained that at first, everything seemed normal. Whenever he met Rob Reiner and his family, there were smiles, polite conversations, and the usual warmth. But little by little, Brooks started sensing a difference. The energy in the room didn't feel the same anymore. He remembered moments when Rob looked more worried than relaxed, even at casual gatherings. There were times when the conversation would suddenly become tense for no clear reason. Brooks said he could feel an invisible heaviness, something no one openly talked about. At the time, he assumed it was just ordinary family stress. After all, every household has ups and downs. But now, looking back, those memories felt much more important. Brooks spoke about how he noticed Nick becoming quieter and more distant over the years. The easy laughter that used to be there didn't show up as often. He seemed restless, sometimes distracted, sometimes irritated in situations that didn't used to bother him. None of it screamed danger, but none of it looked extreme. That was exactly the problem. These things don't arrive with alarms, Brooks said. They creep in slowly. He admitted that he never imagined those small signs could lead to something so tragic. Like most people, he believed that love, time, and support would eventually smooth everything out. There were also moments when Rob confided in him in gentle, careful ways. Not complaints, not dramatic stories, just a few honest worries shared between old friends. Rob would mention that being a parent was harder than he ever expected, that he wished he knew the right thing to do. Brooks said he always encouraged him, telling him that families go through phases and that patience usually helps. That advice felt sensible at the time. Now it felt painfully simple. He also remembered occasions when Nick didn't show up to family events or left early without explanation. Again, nothing shocking, just small hints that something deeper might be happening beneath the surface. Brooks described how easy it is to explain away those moments. You tell yourself someone is just having a bad day or going through a rough period. You don't jump to worst-case conclusions about people you care about, but after everything that happened, those memories began to line up like pieces of a puzzle. I keep asking myself what I missed, Brooks admitted, what all of us missed. He wasn't blaming anyone. He wasn't pretending he had all the answers. He was simply being honest about how difficult it is to recognize emotional struggles before they reach a breaking point. In his view, the tragedy didn't begin with one final moment. It began years earlier, in quiet ways no one fully understood. And that realization, he said, was one of the hardest parts to accept. As Albert Brooks went deeper into his reflections, he began to talk about something many people rarely consider, the pressure of growing up in a famous family. He explained that the public often assumes being the child of a Hollywood legend must be easy. Money, opportunities, connections, and a life surrounded by success. From the outside, it looks like a dream, but Brooks said the reality can be very different. When your last name already carries a legacy, he explained, people expect you to live up to it, even before you know who you are. According to him, that kind of pressure can weigh heavily on a young person. Instead of being allowed to grow at their own pace, they are constantly compared to the success of their parents. Every mistake feels bigger. Every struggle feels more visible. Brooks believed that this invisible burden played a significant role in the emotional challenges Nick faced. He spoke about how difficult it must have been to have a father as admired and accomplished as Rob Reiner. Everywhere Nick went, people knew who he was. They didn't see him as an individual first. They saw him as Rob Reiner's son. That label, Brooks said, can slowly steal a person's confidence. He imagined what it must feel like to live under that kind of spotlight without ever asking for it. To be judged not for who you are, but for who people expect you to become. To feel like no matter what you do, you will always be standing in someone else's shadow. And Brooks didn't present this as an excuse. He made that very clear. But he believed it was an important part of the story. He described how Hollywood success often comes with hidden costs. Fame brings admiration, but it also brings expectations, comparisons, and constant attention. For some people, that attention becomes overwhelming instead of inspiring. Not everyone is built for that life, Brooks said quietly. He talked about how Nick may have felt trapped between two worlds. On one side, a family that loved him deeply and wanted the best for him. On the other side, an industry that constantly reminded him of everything he hadn't yet achieved. That combination, Brooks believed, created frustration and inner conflict. He also pointed out how difficult it can be for parents in those situations. Rob and Michelle wanted to support their son, but they also had to navigate the complicated reality of public life. Every problem felt bigger because it was attached to a famous name. Brooks suggested that the very success Rob Reiner worked so hard to build may have unintentionally added pressure to his own child. It's a cruel irony, he said. The thing that makes a family proud can sometimes be the thing that hurts them most. By bringing up this angle, Brooks helped people see the tragedy in a broader, more human way. It wasn't just about one family or one moment. It was about the emotional weight that often hides behind privilege and opportunity. And for the first time, many listeners began to understand how complicated the situation truly was. As the conversation around the tragedy continued, Albert Brooks shared something even more personal, a private memory that stayed with him long after it happened. He explained that a few years earlier, he had a quiet, unexpected conversation with Nick that he never forgot. It wasn't a planned meeting or a serious sit-down talk. It was one of those casual moments that happen naturally between people who have known each other for a long time. But according to Brooks, that conversation carried more weight than he realized at the time. He remembered noticing that Nick seemed tired in a way that went beyond ordinary stress. There was a heaviness in his voice, a frustration that didn't match the situation they were in. Brooks said he tried to keep things light, to joke the way he always did. But Nick didn't respond with his usual energy. Instead, he opened up a little. Nick spoke about feeling lost and unsure of his direction. He talked about how hard it was to figure out who he really was, separate from his family name. He mentioned feeling like he never quite fit anywhere, not fully in Hollywood and not fully outside of it either. Brooks listened carefully, thinking it was just one of those honest moments people have from time to time. He offered encouragement, telling Nick that everyone struggles with identity and purpose at some point in life. At the time, Brooks believed that reassurance was enough. But now, looking back, he wondered if that moment was actually a quiet cry for help. It didn't sound dramatic, Brooks said. It just sounded sad. He explained how easy it is to misunderstand those kinds of conversations. When someone speaks calmly and politely, people assume they are okay. Real pain doesn't always arrive with obvious signs. Sometimes it hides behind ordinary words and everyday smiles. Brooks admitted that he walked away from that conversation believing Nick would eventually find his way. After all, he had a supportive family, resources, and opportunities. From the outside, it looked like he had everything he needed to build a good life. That belief made it easy to stop worrying. Only after the tragedy did Brooks replay that memory over and over in his mind. He began to hear the uncertainty in Nick's voice in a new way. Sentences that once sounded casual suddenly felt much more serious. "I wish I had asked more questions," Brooks confessed, but he also acknowledged a painful truth. Even if he had asked more, he might not have understood how deep the struggle really went. People often hide their darkest feelings, even from those closest to them. Brooks said that conversation changed the way he now thinks about every small interaction. It reminded him that you never truly know what someone else is carrying inside. That single memory became for him one of the most heartbreaking pieces of the entire story, because it showed how close people can be and yet still not see the full picture.